Right, Ross, this is one of our favourite things. Nope, not hanging out together. It's being at a whiskey distillery, trying some great whiskey with somebody great as well. So here we are at the White Peak Distillery, home of the Wireworks brand, with Max Vaughan, founder, co-founder, owner, just
Yeah,
the boss.
that'll do.
Thanks for having us.
The chief.
Yeah, this is a whiskey you've introduced me to, a brand that you've introduced me to, the Wireworks brand from the White Peaks Distillery in the last year or so.
Yep.
Probably, and definitely the first English distillery I've ever had the pleasure of visiting as well.
Welcome.
And as you say, being in a warehouse, we like being in a warehouse because it's the best place to drink whiskey.
Yeah, there's something atmospheric about it, something quite special, and it's great that we've got somebody here who can actually tell us some stuff instead of us just making it up. So
And we're not going to run out.
This is
yeah,
it.
well,
This is
we'd
it.
hope not.
That's a good point.
So, Max, can you tell us a story in kind of 60 seconds of White Peak Distillery? What was the inspiration behind it? How's it been
going
for the first
Yeah.
couple of years?
Yeah, thanks. Well, firstly, welcome to White Peak Distillery. We've been here as a business for about 8 years, been making whiskey for 6.5 years. The dream back in the day was to make an authentic English whiskey in an area we love, and Derbyshire's where Claire and I grew up. And then we knew of the Wireworks, which is where we're based, and it's got a really interesting history of making going back 150 years now. And we knew there was some space here, and it was by a river. It was a building with some interesting history, and we just thought it'd be a great place to build our whiskey distillery.
Yeah.
So we got a sense of the style of whiskey we're going to make, and we found the Wireworks as our brand home. And the longer we were here, the more it kind of got under our skin, this history of this part of the Derwent Valley.
You can see it's influenced your bottle and everything, you know?
Yeah, exactly. So we ended up, we didn't know exactly on day one what our whiskey was going to be branded as, but we've branded it as Wireworks because of that sense of place. And as you say, the bottle itself is a metaphor.
It's a piece of art, is what it is as well. It is eye-catching, which is something that matters. My understanding of Derbyshire is obviously a big, strong history in terms of brewing, but not necessarily distillation. So are you working with breweries in collaboration with the distillery and such as well?
Yeah, no, absolutely. So as you say, there's no legal history of making spirits here, but there's a huge history of brewing and making beer. And so when we were thinking about whiskey making and breaking it down into its individual components, we just thought there was an interesting place where we could focus in terms of mashing and fermentation and yeast, which has some direct parallels with making beer. And so we now work with a brewery in a town called Bakewell, just 15 miles up the road. Every week we go and collect some live brewer's yeast.
Nice.
And we're pitching that into our fermentations. And we've done that since day one. So every single drop of whiskey we've ever made is made with some brewer's yeast.
Yeah.
Amazing. And in terms of your releases, obviously your whiskey bottlings, any new distillery has a challenge of, it takes time. It takes 12 years to make a 12-year-old whiskey. So what has been your approach in these first few years in terms of your bottlings? Has it been cask-led? Has it been all about demonstrating the spirits? What's been your approach, and how has that evolved?
Yeah, it's probably been a combination of both. We've been keen for people to try our whiskey and try and get our distillate style and our distillery style out there. But equally, you're right. If you're in those early years, in order to get some product out that is at the kind of threshold of quality that we want, then we have introduced some finishes to our kind of more regular casking program.
Do you have a kind of core range as well as like a...
Yeah, so I mean,
releases?
and that's been something that's evolved in the last 18 months. So we've now got 2 core releases, and the plan is to add a third in the next 12 to 18 months.
Amazing.
And then kind of continue to backfill with more limited edition releases, which might be finishes, or there might be other aspects of experimentation.
Yeah.
For example, using local barley.
Yeah.
We're trying to now build the brand further afield on the back of the core releases.
Even looking around the warehouse, there's such an array of different cask types, and I'm sure you're experimenting. I was speaking to your distillery manager, Dave, as well. Had a really good conversation about how he's playing around with different cuts and different fermentation times. You've got a really long fermentation time at the moment, which I thought was really interesting. But what surprised me most about Wireworks is you produce a peated single malt whiskey. So not only an English malt whiskey, which we've had a couple of in the channel so far, but a peated English single malt whiskey, which again, I guess I was naive in assuming that that wouldn't be the natural step. Why was that decision made?
Yeah, so I'm a whiskey fan, so certainly all my adult life been enjoying a few drams, and certainly the lightly peated single malts have always been something that have appealed to me in terms of just having some of that background flavour and complexity, not necessarily kind of with the peat kind of slapping you around.
It doesn't dominate.
I like a really heavily peated whiskey, but the lightly peated has been a bit of a sweet spot for me over time. And so when we were getting going and thinking about the style of whiskey we were going to make, just from a selfish point of view, that was an obvious choice because if we're going to make some whiskey, well, let's make some that I enjoy.
If nobody else likes it, you can just...
If you found a distillery, you should make whiskey that you're going to drink.
Exactly. But then, at the time when we were looking at the other English distilleries that were getting going, and there's many more of them now, the world is changing, but no one else was doing a lightly peated whiskey as their core expression. So for us, it just looked like a nice point of difference.
Yeah. So in terms of core expressions, this bottle in front of us, I believe this was the first core bottling from Wireworks. This is the Caduro.
Yes.
Is that right? Can you tell us the story of what is Caduro?
Yeah.
Where does that word come from?
Yeah, exactly. Well, so the Wireworks had existed here for 120 years before we pitched up. They used to have a brand of cable, many brands of cable, but one of them was called Caduro.
Okay, it really is.
Yeah. So we just thought, well, again, there's something that kind of ties what we're doing to the history of this site and the kind of the legacy we've inherited. And there was a few brands, and a lot of them didn't kind of roll off the tongue that well. But Caduro is one that we just felt would kind of lend itself to a whiskey name.
It's memorable.
Yeah, so it's like a great place to go for a beach holiday. 2 weeks in Caduro.
Yeah, all inclusive, so it is. It's interesting. 46.8%.
Yeah.
Natural colour, non-chill filtered. All the things that we love in a malt whiskey from a relative new distillery. That's very generous as well. This expression uses bourbon and STR, I see.
Yeah.
What's your kind of history of STR cask whiskies? We've had a few.
Good. I think they work really well. I think particularly for kind of new distilleries, as I say, it takes a long time to get that maturity just by leaving it in fairly sort of standard casks for 10 plus years. STR casks, my understanding is, gives a lot of character, but doesn't overwhelm at the same time. So it's
almost kind of accelerates maturation a little bit, because that shave, toast and rechar, what you're doing is it's like getting a virgin oak again, and you're opening all the pores in the wood. I found it to be a real success. King's Barnes is probably the easiest example to draw from a relatively new Scottish distillery that have done really well with that. Really interesting, but I want to try this, so I want to let you do the honours and let you pour us a dram.
Yeah, sure.
Thanks for having us.
Yeah, no, very welcome. Yeah, so and the SDRs are interesting because they're refurbished casks. We can have a conversation with the cooperage, and the cooperage we use is in Porto in Portugal.
Okay.
But about toast levels and char levels and even different types of oak. There's some variety in there.
Because it's not a detail you often see. You see STR, it could actually be European oak, it could be American oak, we don't know.
Yeah. No, I agree. And that we try and give people that detail. But yeah, I guess STR is just often used as a generic term, but we've got about 6 different varieties of STR.
That's really interesting.
I suppose it's like when people talk about sherried whiskey.
Yeah.
It's like, well, what does that mean?
Yeah.
It could mean a dozen different things.
Well, you have so many conversations about whiskey through the generations as well. Speaking about this would have been American oak sherry cask or European oak sherry cask, and actually the difference that makes. But bourbon cask whiskey is generally what I prefer.
Yeah.
I like whiskey that's not too cask led.
Yeah.
And And I'm really interested because from previous expressions, that's not always been the case with why it works, because I loved the double oak port
Right, yeah.
that we had previously. That was the last one I had. So I'm looking forward to trying this. Cheers, gentlemen.
Yeah,
Cheers. Thanks
Absolute
again for
pleasure.
having us.
Cheers.
And again, this is kind of what I found in the previous expressions. I'm not getting a big punch in the face of the peat. There is a savoury note, for
Yeah.
sure.
Yeah,
Yeah, I mean, the peat's definitely, I mean, for me at least, I find it more on the finish and it's more in the background.
Yeah, we've spoken before about ppm and all that stuff, and how it's a figure that can be taken out of context quite easily, because it depends when you measure it.
Yes.
But in terms of peatiness in general, how do you think this compares to perhaps single malt?
Yeah, I mean,
Scotch
we're only just on the scale. I mean, if that that ppm marker, as you mentioned, Laurie, I think we're round about 10 ppm in the grist.
Okay.
But by the time it's been distilled, we're down to about 3 ppm.
Yeah, and then by the time it's matured, etc.
Yeah, and then that's going to just slightly reduce over time with maturation. So I guess if we were on a scale with some of the from the Isla malts, then we'd only just be on the the cusp of it. But for us, there's enough to give it some background flavour and complexity.
Yeah. What are your thoughts on this, Ross?
Really like it. It's very, very clean on the palate, which again is what you want from a bourbon-led whiskey. A nice kind of subtle warming spice, but I think it drinks really well at the strength. Again, it's a generous strength. We can add the water if we feel it necessary. Obviously, no age statement because you're a young, youthful distillery. How important do you think that is? A lot of people get really fixated.
How old is it?
No, people get really fixated on the age of a whiskey, and a lot of people won't even know that it's always the youngest age on the bottle, etc., and all the rules with it.
Yeah.
This would stand up to loads of different ages. You could tell me it was a 10, 12-year-old. Obviously, you're not that old. And it would absolutely stand up to that. So how important do you think that is? And do you think that you use a peated spirit, because it is lightly peated, do you think it works better at a younger age as well?
Yeah, I mean, good question. So, I mean, in terms of age statement, I don't know, you guys will know as much as I that there seems to be much more open-mindedness amongst whiskey consumer, either new consumers into whiskey or existing ones. Yeah. That age statement's not the be-all and end-all. And obviously, as a new distillery, it's not really it's not really a battleground we can play on. So for us, it's more about making good whiskey in the best way that we can.
And quality of the casks and such, and the story that you tell will do a lot of that.
Yeah, and the whiskey making process itself, up until when the spirit goes in the cask. And so hopefully, the challenge is perhaps getting people to try it if they're fixated on age statements. But hopefully, once they've tried it, and we'd like to think appreciated that it's it's good whiskey, then it kind of at that point it matters not what the age is.
Yeah. I suppose your lack of years in distilling probably works to your advantage, because if somebody comes here to do a distillery tour or a tasting, they're not looking. There are no numbers, there are no ages, so it is purely about taste. It's about cask type.
Yeah.
So it shouldn't really be relevant at all.
No, and those are conversations which are nice for us to have, because we're open about how we make whiskey. So we want to talk about the mashing and the fermentation and the yeast and the distillation. I mean, as much as we want to talk about the wood program as well. But if the conversation doesn't start with age, well, let's put that to one side and talk about how we make it.
I think your transparency is really refreshing, to be honest. It's nice to come into a distillery. You can speak to any one of your team here and ask them. I'd never seen a kind of one of the elements that was attached to your stills. I'd never seen it before.
Right.
And I just got to ask your distillery manager about it, who's been here since day one. And just an amazing kind of openness. And a beautiful part of the world as well. I gotta say, for a first English distillery, it's going to be hard to beat.
Yeah. What a dram. How was it with?
I've added a wee bit of water to it, and it gets softer, sweeter.
Okay.
It really is what you want from a bourbon cask whiskey. The peat dissipates slightly. You still get a little bit of savoury smokiness in the end. How have you found the palate?
I mean, it's great. It's got a nice sort of toastiness to me. It's quite crisp. Actually, when you said refreshing, talking about transparency, I was like, this dram's quite refreshing, actually. For me, it's a great core range product.
Yeah.
I think limited releases with, experimental cask types at a higher strength are great, but this is a fantastic daily sipper. 'Cause
I-
there's levels to it, there's layers to it.
And I think if you've got a curiosity about peated whiskey, this is a fantastic starting point for any any world
It's
style of
kind
whiskey.
of dipping your toe in the ocean of smokiness.
Well, it's a great place to start.
Yeah, no, really well-rounded. You know, we spoke a little bit about age, but this is what some people would call a young whiskey, but it is not immature by any stretch of the imagination.
A pleasure to try it and a pleasure to share it with you.
Yeah.
Yeah, thanks.
Cheers, guys.
Cheers.
Yeah.
Cheers.
If you've enjoyed this video, don't forget to like and subscribe for more Bevvy content. We want to hear what you think, your best whiskey experiences, the whiskies you want us to try. It's a really exciting journey we're on, so make sure to join us. Download the Bevvy app on Google Play and App Store to keep track of your whiskey journey, connect with your whiskey friends, keep track of your favourites, anything you could ever want to do with whiskey, all in one place. It's the definitive whiskey companion.